Happy New Year! 2025 is officially here, and it looks like we have an exciting year of Overwatch waiting for us. Hey folks, my name is Apostle, and welcome back to Watching Overwatch, also known as WoW, the show that covers everything you need to know about Overwatch Esports. Now, while the offseason has slowed things down here over the past few weeks, we do still have things that we can cover, including some real interesting leaks. But before we get to that, we're going to be kicking things off by talking about Calling All Heroes, which has its 2025 Champion Series starting this week. And here's what to be looking for. First thing to know is that this tournament is basically the Avengers Endgame of Calling All Heroes. Basically, every standout player that you can think of is going to be here competing to take it all. Now, that being said, there are basically a big three of teams to keep an eye on here, so let me introduce you to them. So starting off, we have Nightmare Eclipse, which is a super team that was put together back in Major 3, and they were able to win it with a 4-2 in Grand Finals. This is the team to beat 100%. And looking at the names on the roster, it's really not hard to see why. You have so many legends of Calling All Heroes that have come together under one roof here, and so far they've been living up to expectations. With arguably the best players in every single role, this team is a titan, and it's ready to stand at the top one last time. But they aren't the only team with star power, as biting at their heels we have Queen's Gambit, who finished second in Major 3. Gambit has its own proven talent, with Senna on the hitscan DPS role and Velvet and Scuffed on their support line. These three players have a ton of experience under their belts, and it's allowing Gambit's other players to really start shining as well. Santana on tank especially has been incredible to watch lately, even going so far as to beat out a player like Hitori occasionally in Major 3, which is no small feat. The rising stars on this team have been looking great, and when you put them together alongside the more experienced players, it's creating an amazing roster that overall is looking like they're ready to solidify themselves as a top tier. Speaking of the rising stars though, that brings me to our third team, EXO Azathoth, who finished third in Major 3. Now, this team may not have the biggest names compared to the other two, but the growth they've displayed over the past year makes it impossible to not consider them a serious contender. They went from 5th and 6th place finishes in Minor and Major 2 to a 4th place in Minor 3 and then a podium finish in Major 3. The team has an incredible ability to level up every single time we see them play. They're without a doubt one of the most dedicated and consistent teams, and they're really taking full advantage of their longevity as a team to really punch up. These individual names might not be quite as well known, but the synergy and teamwork that they've built up definitely makes up for it. Assuming they can continue the trend they've been on, they're definitely going to be a scary team here in the championship, so it'll be super exciting to see just how high their ceiling can go. Now, there are still a couple dark horses to look out for, namely Invalentine and Fable. These are two names that have been around Calling All Heroes for quite some time, and while their successes have fluctuated over the past season, this tournament is going to be their chance to prove that they're top contenders still. They're actually currently the top two teams if you look at the Circuit Point rankings, which goes to show that they do have huge potential. It's just a matter of whether or not they can live up to it. Valentine in particular though, they have some very familiar names, so if anyone's going to pull off some upsets, it's probably going to be them. Either way though, expect some close games and a super fun tournament to watch. Now, back in the OWCS side of things, the puzzle is slowly being put together of what to expect teams to look like. Before we get into leaks though, let's talk about the official announcements. First, the biggest thing to know is that Overwatch in China is officially back. Not only is the game back and actually playable there again with its own servers, but China has become its own region in OWCS. Interestingly, we're actually guaranteed to see them at international events, as they'll have two teams able to qualify alongside two teams from Korea, NA, and EU for the 8-team total. Now, while that's great, and it does basically guarantee that we'll see once again at every event, I do worry a bit for the second team that qualifies, since I would guess that the second place team in China is probably going to be closer to the level of the top Pacific or Japanese teams, as opposed to like the best of NA and EU, much less Korea, right? But with the region fully supported now, hopefully the kind of overall level there can rise back to its peak. If you've been around the scene for a while, you know that back in the day, China was definitely considered a top contender, so I'm excited to see if they can get that back. Now let's talk the officially announced rosters. First off, from The Gamer, or FTG, they're officially back as they've announced their new roster. Going to be featuring Hisung on tank, Prophet and Sunjun on DPS, and Vigilante Vinding as a support line. Now, this is actually a pretty interesting lineup, as Prophet and Sunjun, they actually played together on Seoul Dynasty for a brief period, while Big P Prophet was out on a leave. And Vindame was also a Seoul Dynasty player for quite some time, though he did not play at the same time as those other two. While the DPS line, I think it still needs to prove itself as kind of top tier, support line is pretty solid in theory at least. I know there's a lot of questions surrounding Vindame, some people think he's a fraud, but he has played at high levels, right? So if we can see that, we'll be set. Hisung solo tanking, it's an interesting prospect, but I think it's pretty exciting because people have talked about this guy for a long time, But when he was on Zeta Division, he was kind of bench riding behind Bernard. So I think he does need to kind of still prove himself a bit, but if he lives up to the hype, we should see a very solid roster here. Next up, we actually have Twisted Minds with their roster announcement, and this one is super interesting. They've actually signed a bunch of the former SSG roster, with Psycho, Funny Astro, and Hadi all joining here. They've also brought on Irony, the talented Korean Flex support player, and Quartz and Yubi are actually going to be remaining. Quartz is a no-brainer, obviously. Everyone expected him to stay. He's the star player for this team. They're never going to get rid of him. Yubi, on the other hand, is a bit more questionable, especially given his performances as of late, but the argument does exist that he has a lot of overlap with heroes that Backbone was actually known for, like the Mei, the Sim, right? So we'll see if keeping him is actually going to be worth it. Now, one more roster announcement I have to mention is Vortex Wolf from OWCS Japan, who have actually signed Kalios and Edison. That's right, John Sojourn himself is now back in business, and given the region, it's not hard to imagine him popping off here. So definitely keep an eye on that team if you're a fan of him. Now, prior to the exciting stuff though, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up some of the bad news that we have, which is that several teams have announced their departure from OWCS, at least for the time being. First off, Defiant and ENCE have both officially announced their departures, with ENCE citing financial instability as their reason for not continuing, and Defiant is a bit more complicated, but likely a similar situation overall. NRG is also 99% out following this tweet that came from CEO Andy Miller, which says that they were not selected to be a partner team. And finally, we have Nightmare, who are likely also out following statements from their CEO Flack. At this time, they are still participating in Calling All Heroes, but their future in OWCS is kind of uncertain. I think we might still see Nightmare rotation show up from time to time, but it does seem like they're going to be pulling back from at least what they've invested in so far. Now, all that does seem kind of discouraging, and you know what? I'll admit it. There's a lot of decisions here that they don't really make sense to me. They are questionable, but you know what? Things aren't all bad. We're at the cusp of a new era here, and you can't have new beginnings without some things ending. I'm sure someday we'll find out more about what kind of happened behind the closed doors, but for now, we'll just bid these teams a fond farewell, and we'll just remember all the great moments that they've given us. So with that being said, let's look to the future, and start talking about some of the leaks that we've gotten. Now, remember, all this is currently just rumors. It's subject to change at any time. Some of it might be completely wrong, but it's still fun to discuss it. So let's dive in and see what we got. We're gonna start with what everyone is probably wondering about, which is who actually are the partnered teams. We have a pretty decent of what's what at this point. Asia is the most likely to be correct, with T1, Crazy Raccoons, and Falcons being identified as the partnered teams there. In North America, Space Station is super likely, and the next two are kind of interesting. Apparently, Team Liquid will actually be entering Overwatch again for the first time in over 7 years, and they'll be one of the partner teams for the region. NA's third team, though, is still very much up in the air. Now, originally, people were saying that it was supposed to be Cloud9, but apparently they just kind of ghosted everyone, including Blizzard, and now that third spot is just undecided. In the past couple days, though, it's been said that the esports org FlyQuest will actually be entering Overwatch, and that they might be the ones to also get that third spot. Now, over in EMEA, Twisted Minds did secure a partner spot, which isn't super surprising, especially now that ENCE and SSG are gone. What is surprising is that Gen G are actually going to re-enter Overwatch in that region, and they'll be one of the partners as well. This has actually been semi-confirmed as they announced that Krusty would be their head coach on Twitter, so we do know for sure that they are coming back to Overwatch. This is the same org that brought us Seoul Dynasty during OWL, so it's fun to see them back. And although I have seen some people kind of disappointed that they're not competing in Asia, I think it's good to have them back regardless of where they are. Now, EMEA's third partner slot is apparently still undecided, though it's likely to be Virtus Pro given that they are going to be sticking around. Several of these teams do actually have rosters leaked already, and we can see what they might look like here. Krusty has put together a pretty interesting roster for Gen G, with Mag and Top Dragon as his two imports. The Crispy Canale backline should also be really solid. However, I'm not entirely sold on the Sana Top Dragon DPS line. The thing is, the hero pools for those two, they have a lot of overlap. They are both flex DPS players, and with no strong hit scan, they could really struggle. Personally, I'd love to actually see them maybe grab Sparker, who, from what we know, is still available, and he seems like he could be a perfect piece to kind of round that roster out. Next up, we have a new team from Saudi Arabia called the Ultimates. This team has gotten the ENCE core of Kai, Kevster, Chase, and Skyreaper, but they've made some pretty interesting additions. Notably, Twilight is actually back, playing alongside Faith in that support line. Twilight is of course considered one of the best flex support players of all time pretty much, And if this is true, it's a super exciting signing. Faith, though, while he's super consistent, he's never quite been top tier. So we'll have to see how these guys actually work out as a duo. Rounding out the roster, we also have KSA, who, of course, very talented player, and he'll likely be the go-to pick for the more traditional off-tanks. Next up, VP. They've also had quite a few changes, with so many of their players moving elsewhere, and they've picked up Knife and Vestola to make up for it. Now, personally, I'm actually a little bit sad about this, as I loved the Spanish backline they had, and I think Rajaro was really proving himself as like a super strong tank player for the team. Vestola might be a little better, granted, but I really hope we see Rajaro come back somewhere. Picking up Knife, though, I think is very exciting. This might be the season we finally get to see him unleashed. When he was on Fnatic, that team was cursed, and then he was stuck on the bench there at Crazy Raccoons, but here, this might be his time to shine. We'll see just how cracked he can be. Now back in North America, SSG and Team Liquid both have their rumored rosters as well. Liquid has signed the Defiant backline, which is arguably the strongest one available, and they added Tree and Infected, two of the best talents in NA, so that's already stacked. But then they went a step farther and added Pelican, who proved he still got it when he was on Zeta recently. This team is absolutely monstrous by NA standards, but SSG, they have made moves of their own. We have Seeker and Sugarfree as SSG's DPS line, which is also very strong. Until proven otherwise, Sugarfree is still the best flex DPS in North America, so hopefully he stays at that level. They have CJ there on support, and then for their imports, they have Bliss and Kellen. Now, I know Kellen is kind of seen as a bit of a meme at this point. He's basically just like a second version of Mag, but personally, I believe in this guy. I think he has the potential to be a super strong piece. And as for Bliss, I think his talent speaks for itself. He's been one of the best main supports to not yet be on an S tier team. But maybe this will finally be what changes that. And finally, we have the leaks for the Korean teams. Team Falcons have apparently had lots of changes, which might be a bit of a worry for Falcons fans. Allegedly, there are some rumors that Chio and Stalker had a bit of a falling out, which then led to the entire team imploding. Now, Stalker obviously left the team because of that, but afterwards, both Fielder and Hanbin actually followed as well. Combine this with the fact that Smurf retired, and things get a little bit dicey for them. Now granted, this isn't the first time we've had reports of Chio being a bit of a troublemaker, but it is definitely the most impactful that it's been. The Falcons rebuild will actually see Shu being taken from Crazy Raccoons, and for tank and DPS, we have Merit and Someone. The duo that terrorized NA is finally back to look for the crown in their home region. What's worth looking forward to here is that with Merit joining, we can actually expect to see Proper playing the flex DPS role a lot more often, which should be really exciting. Now, funny enough, with Shu being gone from Crazy Raccoons, obviously they needed a replacement, and who else would they get but Fielder? Now, while Chio and Fielder have been the duo for the longest time, I think this kind of makes perfect sense. If you need someone as good as Shu, there's no one else you can look to other than Fielder, really. So it ended up just kind of being a straight player swap between these two teams. Now, as for T1, the rumor is that they're going to have Donghak, Proud, and Viper as their core, with possibly Skewed and Opener being a likely support line. Now, I think this roster is admittedly a little bit weaker than people have maybe been expecting. Make no mistake, I think Proud and Viper are super good players, but they're not exactly known for flexibility, which is something that I think you need to value really highly now that we know hero bans are coming to OWCS. But with Hanbin and Stalker being on the market, I think there is still a world where we see a lot of shuffling going on in the Korean teams now in order to try and make room for those two. So who knows what the final iteration of this team will end up looking like. Overall, things have definitely been shaken up, and I think that'd be an understatement, honestly. Crazy Raccoons and Zeta seem to be the only teams that have gotten through the offseason relatively unscathed. And you know what? Being able to keep that established synergy might actually go a long way in the coming season. In fact, I'll make a call right now. If these rumors come true, Crazy Raccoon will be top 1 easy, with Zeta as the number 2, and Falcons might occasionally trade games with them, but overall, Falcons is probably going to be in that 3rd place. I don't even think that's too much of a hot take, but go ahead, mark my words. As for EMEA and North America, I think there's still too many unknowns to make any super strong predictions right now, but competition is going to be very close. I think talent is a lot more spread out now, and things are going to be a lot more even than we've seen previously. Now, we are nearing our close here, so let's take a look at what to expect in the next few days and weeks. First off, Calling All Heroes Championship. Like I mentioned earlier, this is currently happening right now from January 9th to January 12th. You can tune in on the official OWCS Esports channel and see who's going to be coming out on top there. These are genuinely some good games. games, and of course, it's an amazing scene to support, so make sure you tune in, get your drops, and just enjoy the matches. Next up, we have the Pro Chaser Association, now truly able to come into its own with China being back in business. Now currently, the group stage is still ongoing, and it will be until January 12th, but the playoffs will be happening on January 17th and 19th in a single elimination bracket, but all matches are first to 4. These matches are actually being streamed on YouTube now with the official Pro Chaser YouTube channel, which will make things so much easier to follow. Now that the region has official support again, expect tournaments like this to really take off. And if you can get in at the ground floor, you'll be all set to enjoy the growth no matter how far it goes. And last but not least, finally we have OWCS. Of course, we had to mention it. There is official confirmation now that the opening day will be on January 31st. Now, we do still have a bit of time to go before that date comes, of course, but this is definitely something you'll want to be able to catch. Anyway, with that, we do come to a close. Obviously, we've had a ton of changes with the teams, the regions, the rule sets, and it is a lot to take in. I know some of the changes have led to some, let's say, disappointing outcomes, but I do believe that overall we are being set up for success. This year we'll have big things in store for fans of the esport. It's easy to fall into doomer mentalities these days, but you know what? Let's just sit back and enjoy the ride. Things are gonna be fun. As always, links to everything I talked about can be found right down below, including the links to the upcoming and ongoing tournaments. Make sure you check it out down there, and let me know in the comments which one of these league teams you're most excited to see come true. As always, there might be a lot to keep track of, but even if you can't manage to take it all in, that's what I'll be here for. Thank you all so much for watching, and let's have a great year. Take care, guys.